Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I heard laughter coming from my neighbor's garage late at night. A dark web stream showed that same garage, but it was full of people. Alright, so let me preface this by saying that I'm not the type to jump to conclusions or make things out to be bigger than they are. I'm a normal guy, mid-20s, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood about an hour outside of Seattle. Life here is average. I work remotely in IT, binge way too much Netflix, and waste time scrolling through TikTok like everyone else. I've never been one for drama, and the last time something remotely exciting happened was when my other neighbor accidentally drove her car into her mailbox. So, when I say this story has messed me up, I mean seriously messed me up. It all started about 2 weeks ago. My neighbor, let's call him Steve, moved into the house next door about 6 months back. At first, he seemed like a chill guy, early 40s, a little quiet, but polite enough. He worked as a mechanic and kept to himself for the most part. Sometimes I'd hear him tinkering with cars in his garage late at night, but that's about it. Nothing weird, right? Everyone has hobbies. But then, one night, I started hearing something different. It was around 1 a.m., and I was up late gaming. I had my headphones on, but I swear, I heard faint laughter coming from outside. At first, I thought it was some teenagers screwing around, but when I muted my game, I realized it was coming from Steve's garage. It wasn't just normal laughter. It was loud, almost hysterical, and weirdly unsettling. Like, it didn't sound like one person. It sounded like a crowd. Now, I'm not nosy by nature, but the laughter went on for hours. It wasn't until 3 a.m. that it finally stopped. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he had friends over. But the next day, when I saw Steve taking out his trash, I casually asked him about it. Late night party, I joked. He gave me this weird look, like I'd said something offensive. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just working on a project, he said, and then walked back into his house without another word. Okay, weird, but whatever. I let it go. A few nights later, the same thing happened, only this time, it wasn't just laughter. I could hear muffled voices, almost like a chant. It was low and rhythmic, but the laughter was still there too, cutting through the night like a knife. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it wasn't my problem, when I noticed something strange through my window. There was a faint glow coming from Steve's garage, not like the usual white light from fluorescent bulbs. This was red, flickering, almost like a fire. And the weirdest part? His garage door was cracked open, just enough for me to see shadows moving inside. At this point, my curiosity was eating me alive. I grabbed my phone and did what any self-respecting millennial would do. I opened Snapchat. I figured I'd record a quick video to show my friends, because honestly, it was starting to feel like the setup to some weird YouTube prank. But as soon as I opened the camera, the laughter stopped. Dead silence. The red light vanished. The garage door slowly creaked shut, and I swear, I saw a pair of eyes staring at me through the gap before it closed completely. I'm not proud of how fast I closed my blinds and turned off my lights. The next day, I couldn't get it out of my head. I even Googled weird laughter late at night, like some kind of idiot. Of course, nothing useful came up, but one rabbit hole led to another, and somehow I ended up on Reddit, specifically a thread about the deep web. Now, I've always been vaguely aware of the deep web. You know, that shady part of the internet where people buy illegal stuff and do God knows what, but I'd never actually tried accessing it myself. The more I read though, the more I got curious. People on the thread talked about these live streams, Red Room shows where viewers could watch horrifying things happen in real time. Some said it was just urban legend, but others claimed they'd seen it themselves. I don't know what possessed me, but that night I downloaded Tor, the browser people use to access the deep web. I'm not going to explain how I did it because, honestly, I don't want anyone else following my stupidity. Let's just say it wasn't hard. Within an hour, I was on some sketchy forums, scrolling through links I had no business clicking on. That's when I saw it. A thread titled, "Garage Show, Live Tonight." The post was short, just a single line of text. The laughter begins at midnight. Below it was a link. I stared at the screen for a long time. It was probably some troll, right? But a small, nagging voice in the back of my head wouldn't let it go. Midnight was only 15 minutes away, and I couldn't shake the memory of Steve's garage, the laughter, the red light, the shadows. Against my better judgment, I clicked the link. The page that loaded was basic. A black background with a single video player in the center. The title at the top read, "The Garage Show, Livestream." There were no comments, no chat box, nothing. Just the video player, which displayed a countdown. 0, 0, 0, 1, 30. My heart was racing. I almost closed the browser, but something kept me there. I watched the countdown tick down. 30 seconds, 10 seconds, 5, 4, 3. When the stream started, my stomach dropped. The camera was positioned in what looked like a dimly lit garage. A garage that looked exactly like Steve's. The red glow was back, coming from a line of candles arranged in a circle on the floor. In the center of the circle was a chair, and sitting in the chair was a man. His hands and feet were tied, and his head was slumped forward like he was unconscious. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his shirt was ripped, and there were dark stains on the fabric. The laughter started again, low and guttural, echoing through my headphones. And then the camera panned. It moved slowly, almost like it was teasing me, until it focused on a group of people standing in the shadows. They were all wearing these creepy, identical masks, white, with exaggerated smiles painted on them. One of them stepped forward, holding a large wrench, and the laughter got louder. I slammed my laptop shut so hard I nearly broke it. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there in the dark, heart pounding, staring at my window, like Steve was going to burst through at any moment. I didn't know what to do. Call the cops? What would I even tell them? Hey, my neighbor might be running some kind of murder cult in his garage. They'd think I was crazy. The next morning, I decided to pretend like nothing had happened. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't Steve's garage. Maybe it was just some sick internet prank. But when I went outside to get my mail, I saw him. Steve was standing in his driveway, wiping his hands on a rag. He smiled at me, and for the first time, I noticed just how sharp his teeth looked when he did. "You up late last night?" he asked casually. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone what I'd seen, not a single soul. But the way he said it, the way he was looking at me, I swear, he knew. I don't think I've ever felt real fear until that moment when Steve looked me in the eyes and asked if I'd been up late. It wasn't the question itself. It was his tone. Casual, like he already knew the answer, like he'd been watching me. I just stammered out something lame like, yeah, couldn't sleep, and walked back into my house as fast as I could without running. I locked the door behind me and went straight to my room, pulling the blinds closed. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, but what could I even say? Hey, my neighbor's smile creeps me out, and I think I saw a live murder on the internet last night. Yeah, great plan. That'll go over well. But then I remembered something. Before I slammed my laptop shut, the stream had shown a timestamp in the corner of the screen. It had said 12:03 a.m. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it hit me. If the stream was live, it was happening at the exact same time. I heard the laughter, which meant that was Steve's garage. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe it was some elaborate prank. Maybe the garage just looked similar. Maybe the guy tied to the chair was an actor. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. And then there was the other thing, the masks, those white masks with the exaggerated smiles. They felt familiar, but I couldn't place where I'd seen them before. I spent hours digging through my memory until it finally clicked. About a month ago, I'd seen Steve unloading a box from his car. It was big, taped shut, and I remember jokingly asking him if he was smuggling something. He just gave me one of those tight-lipped smiles and said, "Just some supplies." But now I was almost certain those masks were in that box. That night, I stayed glued to my laptop, paranoid that another stream might pop up. I didn't want to click another link, but I also couldn't stop myself. It was like scratching at a scab. You know you shouldn't, but the itch is unbearable. Midnight came and went, and thankfully nothing happened. But just as I was starting to feel relief, I got a notification on my phone. It was from Instagram, a DM request from someone I didn't know. The username was a string of random numbers and letters. No profile picture, no posts, just one message. "Watch yourself." I stared at the screen, heart pounding, before finally typing back, "Who is this?" No response. I blocked the account and put my phone on silent, but the anxiety was eating me alive. I checked all the locks in my house, twice. I even dragged a chair in front of my bedroom door, just in case. But nothing happened that night, or the next. For a few days, it was almost like things were going back to normal. And then I heard the basement door. I should probably explain. I live alone. My house has a basement, but I never use it. It's mostly empty except for some old furniture left by the previous owner. The door to it is in the kitchen, and it's one of those heavy wooden ones that creaks loudly whenever you open it. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it creak. Not the wind, not the house settling. It was the distinct sound of the door opening. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I was sitting in the living room, headphones on, watching a video about urban legends. Ironic, I know. I muted the video and held my breath, listening. Another creak, and then the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming up the basement stairs. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, an empty wine bottle, and stood up, my hands trembling. The footsteps stopped just as I reached the kitchen. The door was open, swinging slightly on its hinges. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. No response. I took a step closer, my bare feet cold against the tile. That's when I noticed something on the floor. A smudge of dirt, like someone had tracked it in from outside. Only, it wasn't dirt. It was red. Blood. My instincts told me to run, to get out of the house. But something stronger, stupidity, maybe, kept me rooted in place. I pushed the door open the rest of the way, holding the bottle like it was a weapon. The basement was pitch black, but I could hear faint breathing, deep and raspy, coming from somewhere below. I was about to slam the door shut when I saw it. A white mask, sitting on the bottom step, staring up at me. My blood ran cold. I couldn't see who or what was wearing it, but the painted-on smile seemed to stretch wider the longer I looked. The breathing got louder, more ragged, like whoever was down there was getting closer, and then the doorbell rang. I practically jumped out of my skin. The sound was so loud, so sudden, that I nearly dropped the bottle. My first thought was that it had to be the police, but I hadn't called them. My second thought was Steve. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, then ran to the front door, peeking through the peephole. No one was there. The porch was empty, but when I opened the door, I found something waiting for me. A single sheet of paper, folded in half, with one word scrawled across the front. Tomorrow. The next day was a blur. I didn't go to work. I couldn't. My hands were shaking so badly that I spilled coffee all over the counter, and every sound made me jump. I even thought about going to the police, but what was I going to say? "Hey, I think my neighbor is running some kind of murder cult in his garage, and also someone broke into my house and left a mask in my basement." They'd laugh me out of the station. I spent most of the day barricaded in my room, refreshing Reddit threads about the deep web, trying to find anything that would explain what was happening. And then, just before midnight, I got another DM. This time, it was a link. No message, no context, just a link. I knew I shouldn't click it. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to ignore it, to delete it, to throw my phone into a river and never look back. But curiosity got the better of me. The link led to another live stream. Only this time, the title was different. It read, "The basement door wasn't locked." The camera feed was dark at first, just a faint outline of what looked like my living room. My living room. The angle was wrong though. It was too high up, like the camera was mounted on the ceiling. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was looking at. The camera wasn't in my living room. It was in my basement, looking up through the vent. And then the laughter started again. The laughter wasn't just on the live stream anymore. It was in my house. I could hear it echoing faintly, rising up from the basement vent, like some sick joke. My chest felt like it was about to cave in. I slammed my laptop shut, but the sound didn't stop. It was real, and it was coming from below me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get the hell out of my house and never come back. But I couldn't move. My legs were frozen, my back pressed against the wall as I stared at the basement door across the room. It was still locked, still barricaded with a chair, but that didn't matter. They were already inside. They had to be. And then, my phone buzzed. It was a notification, one I've never gotten before. Incoming call, unknown number. My throat felt tight, like I couldn't swallow. My shaking hands hovered over the screen. I didn't want to answer it. Hell, I didn't even want to look at it. But the sound of the laughter was getting louder now, filling the room, seeping into my bones. I couldn't think straight. So, like the idiot I am, I answered. I didn't say anything at first, neither did they. The line was silent, except for the faint static that crackled through the speaker. I kept waiting for them to say something, but all I got was breathing. Slow, deliberate, heavy breathing. I mustered up every ounce of courage I had and whispered, "Who is this?" The laughter stopped, and then they said my name, my full name, Jason. It was a woman's voice, soft and sweet, like she was calling a child in for dinner. But it wasn't comforting, it was mocking. The way she said it, like she knew me better than I knew myself, made my skin crawl. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know why I bothered asking. I already knew the answer. They'd been watching me, listening. Maybe for weeks, maybe months. "I told you to watch yourself," she said, almost laughing. "But you didn't listen." I felt something cold slide down my spine. My hands were gripping the phone so tightly, my knuckles were turning white. "What do you want?" There was a long pause, and then she said, "Look outside." I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. But my body moved on its own, like I was being pulled by some invisible force. I crept to the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The street was dark, empty, just like always. But when I looked at Steve's house, my blood turned to ice. The garage door was wide open. Inside, I could see the red glow again, flickering like firelight. Shadows moved across the walls, twisting and shifting, like something out of a nightmare. And then, just for a moment, I saw them. A group of people, maybe 6 or 7, all wearing those awful white masks with the grotesque smiles. They were standing in a circle, facing something I couldn't see. One of them was holding a large metal object, a wrench, maybe, or a crowbar. I couldn't tell, but the way they were standing, so still, so deliberate, it felt wrong, like they weren't human. And then one of them turned. They looked directly at me, tilting their head like they were curious. My heart stopped. I ducked down, pulling the blinds shut as fast as I could. My whole body was trembling now, adrenaline coursing through me like fire. I could barely think, barely breathe. I grabbed my phone again and checked the live stream. It was still going. The camera angle had changed. Now it was showing my window, the exact window I had just looked through. The feed was slightly delayed, but I could see myself standing there, frozen, staring out into the darkness, like a deer caught in headlights. And then the screen went black. I don't remember much after that. I think I panicked and threw my phone across the room. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight was streaming through the cracks in the blinds, and the laughter was gone. Everything felt normal, too normal. I thought maybe it was a dream. Maybe I'd finally lost my mind. But then I saw my phone, lying on the floor where I'd thrown it. The screen was cracked, but it was still on, and there was a notification. One new video message. My stomach churned. My fingers felt numb as I unlocked the phone and opened the message. It was a short video, maybe 10 seconds long. The screen was black at first, but then the camera panned up, showing a single image that made my blood run cold. It was my bedroom. The angle was high, like the camera was mounted in the corner of the ceiling. I could see myself lying in bed, sound asleep, completely unaware. The camera zoomed in slowly, focusing on my face, until the screen cut to black again. Underneath the video was a single line of text. See you tonight. I didn't leave the house that day. I couldn't. Every sound, every shadow made me jump. I kept all the lights on, triple-checked the locks, and stayed glued to the security app on my phone, watching the feed from my front door camera. But nothing happened. The day dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. And then the sun started to set. By 10 p.m., I was losing my mind. I couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever was coming. I had to do something. So I grabbed a flashlight and a kitchen knife and made my way outside. I don't know what I was planning to do. Confront Steve, call him out, demand answers. It didn't matter. I just knew I couldn't stay cooped up in my house any longer. The street was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, making every little noise feel amplified. Steve's garage was closed now, the house dark. But as I got closer, I noticed something on the driveway. A trail of footprints, bloody footprints. They led from the garage to the side of the house, disappearing around the corner. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might pass out, but I forced myself to follow them. The trail led to the backyard, where the footprints stopped abruptly in front of a small, rusted metal door. It was half hidden behind a row of bushes, something I'd never noticed before. The door was slightly ajar, and from the darkness beyond, I could hear faint voices. And then, the laughter started again. I stood frozen in Steve's backyard, staring at the rusted metal door. The laughter, faint but distinct, echoed from the blackness beyond it, worming its way into my ears, like a sound I was never supposed to hear. It wasn't just laughter anymore. It was layered, distorted, like dozens of voices overlapping, some high-pitched, others guttural and deep, all laughing in perfect, horrifying sync. The knife in my hand felt useless, but it was all I had. My flashlight trembled as I pointed it toward the open door. Every fiber of my being told me to turn around, to run, to call the police, or drive until my gas tank hit empty. But I didn't move. I don't know if it was curiosity or fear, or some twisted combination of both, but my feet carried me forward, closer to the door. I pushed it open with the tip of the flashlight, the hinges groaning like they hadn't been used in years. A wave of cold air hit me, carrying the smell of damp earth and something metallic, something coppery and thick. Blood. My stomach churned, and for a second, I thought I might throw up. The laughter was louder now, coming from somewhere deep below. The door led to a narrow staircase that plunged into complete darkness. This was insane. Completely, absolutely insane. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I couldn't stop myself. It felt like I was being pulled, like gravity itself was dragging me down those stairs. So I went. The descent felt endless. The air grew colder, the walls tighter. My flashlight barely lit more than a few feet ahead, and the deeper I went, the more the smell intensified. It wasn't just blood, it was decay. Rot. Like something had died down here a long time ago and never been removed. The stairs finally ended at a concrete floor. The walls were rough and damp, like the inside of a cave. I scanned the flashlight around, trying to get my bearings, and that's when I saw them. The masks. Dozens of them, hanging on the walls, each one identical to the ones I'd seen in the live stream. White, with grotesque, exaggerated smiles. Some of them were smeared with what I could only assume was dried blood. The sight of them made my skin crawl, but it was what was beneath them that nearly made me drop the flashlight. Polaroid photos, hundreds of them, pinned to the walls in no particular order. They were faded, discolored, but I could still make out the faces. Men, women, children. All of them looked terrified, their eyes wide, mouths gagged, tears streaming down their faces. And in every photo, there was a figure standing behind them, wearing one of the masks. The same mask. Steve's mask. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth as bile rose in my throat. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I swore I saw movement in the corner of the room. I whipped the light around, but there was nothing there. Just shadows, just the dark. But then the laughter stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. My ears rang, my breath loud and ragged in the quiet. And then I heard it, a faint, wet sound, like something being dragged across the floor. It was coming from deeper inside. Against every ounce of common sense I had left, I followed the sound, my flashlight cutting through the dark. The corridor was long and narrow, the walls closing in the further I went. The smell was unbearable now, so thick I could taste it. My shoes squished against something wet and sticky, but I didn't dare look down. The dragging sound grew louder, closer, and then I saw it. A figure. It was hunched over something, its back to me. It wore one of the masks, but this one was different. The smile was bigger, wider, almost splitting the mask in half. Its hands were covered in blood, dripping onto the concrete floor as it dragged a large, black plastic bag behind it. The bag was heavy, its contents lumpy and misshapen, like it was holding someone. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. The figure stopped, tilting its head slightly, as if it could sense me standing there. And then, in one slow, deliberate motion, it turned to face me. The mask's hollow eyes stared into mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then it dropped the bag and started walking toward me. Slowly at first, but then faster and faster. I bolted. I didn't care where I was going. I just ran. My flashlight bounced wildly, illuminating flashes of the corridor as I sprinted back the way I came. The sound of footsteps pounded behind me, faster, heavier, echoing off the walls. I could hear its laughter now, loud and maniacal, filling the space around me. I tripped, my knee slamming into the concrete, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I finally reached the staircase, I practically threw myself up the steps, my hands and knees scraping against the rough surface. The footsteps behind me were deafening now, the laughter almost unbearable. I burst through the metal door, slamming it shut behind me and throwing my entire weight against it. The laughter stopped. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, listening. Nothing, just silence. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it all. But then the door shook. Something slammed against it from the other side, hard enough to make my teeth rattle. I screamed, pressing harder against the door, but it slammed again and again. The metal groaned, the hinges straining. I knew it wouldn't hold. And then it stopped. I waited, heart pounding, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I stepped back, my hands trembling. The door didn't move. The silence was overwhelming, suffocating. I wanted to believe it was over, that whatever was behind that door was gone. But deep down, I knew better. I stumbled back to my house, locking every door, every window, triple-checking each one. My hands were covered in blood. Not mine, but I didn't know whose. My mind was racing, replaying everything I'd seen. The masks, the photos, the figure in the corridor, the bag. I sat in my living room, staring at the basement door. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. I just sat there, gripping the knife, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then, at exactly midnight, My phone buzzed. A single text message. No number, no contact. Just one word. Run. My blood turned to ice. The sound of laughter started again, this time from inside my house. It was coming from the basement. And then, slowly, the basement door creaked open. The basement door was wide open, and the laughter was rising again, this time louder than ever. It wasn't just one person laughing. It was a chorus, a symphony of madness echoing from the darkness below. My hands tightened around the knife, but it felt like a toy, a useless, flimsy thing against whatever was down there. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to run so bad, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was stuck in some horrible nightmare, my body frozen while my mind screamed at me to move. And then, something happened that made my stomach drop. The laughter stopped. Completely. It was like the house had been vacuum sealed, all sound sucked away in an instant. I stood there, knife trembling in my hand, staring into the gaping blackness of the basement door. And then, from the shadows, I heard a single word. Jason. It wasn't laughter anymore. It was a voice, deep, guttural, and impossibly close. They weren't downstairs anymore. They were here. I snapped out of my trance and bolted for the front door, not caring about anything except getting out of that house. My heart was hammering, and every breath felt like fire in my chest. I flung the door open and stumbled onto the front lawn, the cold night air hitting me like a slap to the face. My neighbor Steve's house was dark, no sign of life. The whole street was eerily quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, I peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. But then, as I sped down the empty street, my phone buzzed. I shouldn't have looked at it. I know that. But curiosity, or maybe fear, got the better of me. I glanced at the screen, and what I saw nearly made me crash the car. It was a live stream notification. The same site, the same title. The Garage Show, Live Now. I shouldn't have clicked it. I knew I shouldn't have clicked it, but my fingers moved on their own, opening the link as if some unseen force was guiding me. The video loaded, and my stomach twisted into knots. It was me. The live stream was showing me in real time, sitting in my car, driving down the dark, empty street. The angle was impossibly high, like the camera was mounted on a drone or something. I slammed on the brakes, my headlights illuminating nothing but endless asphalt and trees. My eyes darted around, searching for whatever was watching me, but there was nothing there. And then the camera panned. It shifted, showing something in the distance. At first, I couldn't make it out, but as the camera zoomed in, I felt my blood run cold. There was a figure standing in the middle of the road, far ahead of me. It was wearing one of those horrible white masks, the smile painted on its face, too wide, too sharp. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even react to the headlights. It just stood there, waiting. The laughter started again. I threw the car into reverse, my tires screeching as I backed away. The figure didn't move, but I could see more of them now, stepping out of the shadows on either side of the road. 1, 2, 4, 7. They all wore the same masks, their bodies unnaturally still, their heads tilted slightly, as if studying me. The laughter grew louder, echoing from every direction surrounding me. I floored it. The car fishtailed as I spun it around and sped back the way I came. My heart was in my throat, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I didn't know where I was going, but anywhere was better than here. The live stream was still playing on my phone, but the angle had changed again. Now it was showing my house. The basement door was open, the camera slowly zooming in on the stairs. I couldn't stop watching, even as I drove. The screen was dark, but I could see movement, shadows shifting, something coming up the stairs, something big, something wrong, and then it stepped into the light. It was Steve, or at least it looked like Steve, but his face was wrong. His mouth was stretched into an inhuman grin, wider than any human face could manage. His eyes were hollow, empty, but somehow they were still watching me. He held something in his hands, a mask, one of those awful white masks, dripping with blood. I was so focused on the screen that I didn't see the figure standing in the middle of the road until it was too late. The impact was brutal. My car slammed into someone, and I screamed as the airbags deployed, hitting me like a brick wall. The car spun out of control, crashing into a ditch on the side of the road. Pain shot through my chest, my head spinning, but I managed to look up. The figure I'd hit was lying in the road, its mask cracked, its body twisted at an impossible angle. For a moment, I thought it was dead, but then it started to move. Its head snapped toward me, the broken mask shifting to reveal something underneath, something that wasn't human. Its mouth opened, impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged yellow teeth, and then it laughed. Not like before. This was louder, deeper, filled with something primal and cruel. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I stumbled out of the car, my legs barely working, and started running. I didn't care where I was going. I just ran. The laughter followed me, echoing through the trees, growing louder and louder until it felt like it was inside my head. I don't know how I made it out. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed. A nurse told me I'd been found on the side of the road, covered in cuts and bruises, mumbling incoherently. They thought I'd been in a car accident, which I guess wasn't technically wrong. I didn't tell them about Steve, or the masks, or the live stream. What was the point? They'd think I was insane. Hell, I thought I was insane. But when I finally got home, I found something waiting for me. A package. It was sitting on my doorstep, wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. My hands shook as I opened it, pulling away the layers of tape and cardboard. Inside was a single white mask, its smile stretched impossibly wide, and a note written in red ink. "You're part of the show now." The laughter started again. I moved out of that neighborhood the next day. I left everything behind. My house, my job, my life. But no matter where I go, I can't escape it. The laughter follows me. The masks appear in my dreams. And every night, at exactly midnight, my phone buzzes with the same notification. The Garage Show, live now. I never click the link anymore, but sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear them laughing just outside my window. And when I do, I know they're watching. They'll always be watching, because the show must go on. I followed a Reddit thread to a dark web video of a New Year's countdown. The feed showed my house when the clock hit 0. Alright, so this happened on New Year's Eve, and honestly, I'm still trying to piece together what the hell I witnessed. I'm not the kind of person to post on r/NOSLAEP or share spooky stories online. But this wasn't just spooky, it was wrong. Like soul deep, makes your skin crawl wrong. For context, I'm just a regular guy. My name's Liam, 26, single, and working as a freelance graphic designer. I spend way too much time on Reddit. Surprise, surprise. And this New Year's Eve, I was doing what I always do, scrolling aimlessly while a bag of Doritos slowly disintegrated next to me. My friends were all at parties or with their significant others, and honestly, I wasn't in the mood to pretend I was thrilled about the new year. So, I was chilling at home in my small apartment in Seattle, occasionally glancing at my phone while Netflix played Stranger Things in the background. Around 11:15 p.m., I came across this Reddit post on our unresolved mysteries. The title grabbed me instantly. Has anyone else seen the New Year's countdown video on the deep web? It knows things about you. The thread wasn't super long, maybe 10 replies at most. Most people called it fake, but a few commenters sounded genuinely scared. One said, "Don't click the link if you find it. The video isn't just a countdown." Another wrote, "My webcam light came on by itself during it. Not worth the nightmares." Naturally, being the idiot that I am, my brain went, "Ooh, creepy internet mystery." Perfect distraction from my lame life. The original poster didn't share the link to the video, probably because Reddit mods would nuke the thread immediately. But someone commented a link to an Onion site where it was supposedly hosted. You know, one of those sketchy .onion URLs you need Tor browser to access. I should have stopped there. But again, curiosity. I downloaded Tor, something I hadn't done since my college days, when everyone was obsessed with finding haunted corners of the dark web. Once it was installed, I hesitated. I mean, I wasn't stupid. I knew that messing around on the deep web could lead to some seriously illegal or dangerous stuff. But the thread was buzzing in my head like a mosquito. The countdown video knows things about you. What could that even mean? Finally, I typed in the URL and hit enter. The page loaded surprisingly fast, considering Tor isn't exactly built for speed. The site was bare bones, just a black background with bold white text at the top that read, "Welcome to the final countdown." Below that, there was a single embedded video with the title, "See Your Future in Real Time, New Year's Special." I sat there for a moment, staring at the play button. My heart was beating harder than it should have been. There was nothing inherently scary about the page, but the air in my apartment felt heavier. My gut told me to close the browser and forget about it, but my fingers betrayed me. I clicked play. The video started with this grainy, glitchy countdown clock, 11:30:00. The seconds ticked down, and the numbers were accompanied by distorted static sounds, like an old TV trying to find a channel. At first, nothing happened. It was just the clock, ticking away. Then the feed abruptly switched to what looked like random live footage from a public place. A McDonald's, maybe? I couldn't be sure, but I could see people sitting in booths, some with party hats on. The camera was positioned high, like it was taken from a security feed. The video jumped again. This time, it showed a busy Starbucks, a barista handing out drinks, customers laughing with their friends. The timer in the top right corner kept ticking, 11:38:22. At first, I figured this was just some weird live stream collage of public places leading up to the new year, like a creepy art project or something. But then the camera feeds started to feel off. The Starbucks feed zoomed in on one woman sitting near the window. She was scrolling on her phone, sipping a latte. I watched as she suddenly stopped scrolling and looked around, like she'd felt someone watching her. She stared directly at the camera, directly at me. I leaned back in my chair, chills creeping up my spine. Obviously, she couldn't actually see me, right? It's just a video feed. But her eyes locked onto the lens with this intensity that made my stomach twist. After a few seconds, the feed cut out, and the countdown resumed. 11:42, 17. I sat there, frozen. Part of me wanted to close the tab and delete Tor from my laptop forever. But another part, probably the part that watches way too many horror movies, was hooked. I couldn't look away. The next feed was even weirder. It was a high school gym, completely empty except for a single janitor sweeping the floor. The camera slowly panned toward him, and as it did, the screen glitched, just for a second. When the image stabilized, the janitor wasn't sweeping anymore. He was standing perfectly still, holding the mop at his side, staring directly at the camera. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something was wrong with his face. It was hard to tell with the low resolution, but his eyes looked unnaturally wide, like he was forcing them open. His mouth twitched, like he was trying not to smile. The feed jumped again. Another location, another timer update. This time, 11:50 and 9 seconds. It was showing a family in their living room. Parents and 2 kids, all wearing New Year's hats and cheering as they clinked glasses of sparkling cider. It should have been wholesome, but the audio was completely silent, except for that same faint static. And then, the camera zoomed in on the kids. The little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, suddenly stopped cheering. He stared into the camera with wide, glassy eyes, like he was in a trance. His sister tugged at his sleeve, but he didn't move. The parents didn't notice. Anything was wrong. They kept laughing and talking, oblivious to the boy's frozen expression. He raised his hand slowly, so slowly it didn't even look real, and pointed directly at the camera, directly at me. The feed cut out again. Just the countdown now. 11:55:42. 5 minutes left. At this point, I was sweating. My hands were clammy, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, even though I knew no one else was in the apartment. I felt like I was being watched, like the video was peeling back layers of my reality and exposing me to something I wasn't supposed to see. But I still didn't close the tab. I don't know why. Curiosity, stupidity, both? The final feed started at 11:58 and 12 seconds. At first, it was just static. Then the camera panned up to show the exterior of a building. It was night, but I recognized it instantly. It was my apartment building. My throat went dry. The camera zoomed in slowly, shakily, until it stopped on one of the windows. My window. And then the feed cut out, replaced by the countdown. 11:59:45. 15 seconds to midnight. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow. My laptop's webcam light flickered on. Then, just as the clock hit 0, the screen went black. But the knocking started. When the screen went black, I just sat there, frozen. My heart was pounding so loud, I thought my chest was going to crack open. But then the sound came again. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't some polite tap at the door. It was slow, deliberate, heavy, like someone dragging their knuckles along the wood to make sure I heard it. And I swear, it sounded like it was coming from inside the apartment. The knocking kept going, steady and rhythmic, as if it were counting something down. My apartment isn't big. I mean, it's Seattle, so it's basically one room pretending to be a 1-bedroom. There's nowhere for anyone to hide. but the sound was definitely coming from the hallway. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a half-empty beer bottle on my coffee table, and crept toward the door. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. "Hello!" My voice cracked like a bad actor in a horror movie. No answer, just the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate thuds. The peephole felt like it was staring back at me as I leaned in, one eye squinting through. For a second, I thought I was looking at an empty hallway, just the dim glow of the overhead light and the usual peeling wallpaper. But then something moved. It was subtle, just a flicker of shadow near the corner of the frame, but it made my stomach drop like I'd missed a step on the stairs. I couldn't see anyone, but the shadow lingered, darker than the rest of the dimly lit hallway. I swallowed hard, my breath fogging up the peephole. My instincts were screaming at me to call someone, anyone. But here's the thing. I didn't trust myself to explain this without sounding insane. What was I going to say? "Hi, yeah, there's a shadow thing knocking on my door." Instead, I just stood there, bottle raised, heart pounding. The knocking stopped. Silence. I waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two. Just as I was starting to think it was over, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The sound made me jump so hard, I almost dropped the bottle. I bolted back to the couch, grabbing my phone like it was a lifeline. It was a notification from Instagram. Someone had tagged me in a story. That's when the sinking feeling returned, heavier than before. I hadn't posted on Instagram in months, and my profile was private. No random stranger should be able to tag me in anything. I hesitated, but tapped the notification. The story opened, and my blood turned to ice. It was a photo of my apartment door. My apartment number, 7B, was clearly visible, and the angle was from right outside, as if someone was standing there, pointing their phone directly at it. The caption read, "Happy New Year, Liam." I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost docked her, but it was just some generic username, at New Year guest, with 0 followers and no posts. The story disappeared before I could take a screenshot. I grabbed the beer bottle again, gripping it so tight I thought it might shatter. My mind was racing. Was this some kind of sick prank? Did someone I know find the dark web thread and decide to mess with me? But then I remembered the video, the feed showing my apartment, the webcam light, the knocking. I glanced at my laptop. The black screen was still there, but something had changed. A single line of text was now visible in the center. "Step outside and see your future." Nope. Absolutely not. I slammed the laptop shut, like that would somehow make it all go away. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the laptop. Someone was out there, and they were waiting. The knocking started again, harder this time, more urgent. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. Silence. And then, a voice, soft, distorted, like it was coming from an old cassette tape being played backward. "Liam, open the door. Don't make me come in." The beer bottle slipped from my hand and hit the floor, rolling under the couch. I stumbled back, my mind spinning. That voice wasn't human. It was wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my thumb trembling over the screen. The call connected, but before I could say anything, static filled my ears. Not just regular static. It sounded like 100 whispers layered on top of each other, all speaking in this low, guttural hum. "Liam," the voice from the door said again, louder this time. "It's time to celebrate." Then the door handle rattled. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I chose flight. I bolted for the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My mind was screaming at me to climb out the tiny window, but I live on the 7th floor. Not exactly a great escape plan. The bathroom light flickered, and then my phone buzzed again. A text this time, from an unknown number. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. The message said, "You can't hide, Liam." A photo was attached. It was me, sitting on the bathroom floor, staring at my phone. I dropped the phone like it was on fire. My entire body was shaking now. My head was pounding, and I couldn't tell if I was crying or just sweating profusely. "Liam," the voice called again, this time from inside the apartment. My blood ran cold. The knocking was gone. The rattling door handle was gone. And somehow, the voice was now inside. "You shouldn't have clicked the video, Liam. You shouldn't have looked for answers." The bathroom light flickered again, and then went out completely. I held my breath, the darkness swallowing me whole. I could hear footsteps now, slow, deliberate, coming closer. And then, from the pitch black, the voice whispered one last time, "Midnight's over. Time to pay the price." That's when the bathroom door creaked open. The creak of the bathroom door sent my mind spiraling. I pressed myself against the far wall, trying to blend into the tiles, like that would somehow make me disappear. The darkness was suffocating, heavy, like it was alive and pressing in on me from all sides. I didn't hear footsteps anymore, just breathing. Deep, slow breaths, so close, I could almost feel them brushing against my skin. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I was paralyzed. My body had betrayed me, locking up as if it knew there was no escape. The voice came again, quiet and deliberate, from somewhere in the pitch black. "You should have opened the door, Liam. It would have been easier that way." It wasn't just a voice. It was layered, distorted, like multiple people were speaking in unison, all slightly out of sync. And then I realized there was no echo. The bathroom was small and cramped, but the sound didn't bounce off the walls. It just hung there, heavy and wrong, filling the space like it was crawling into my ears. I felt something cold brush against my arm. I yelped, scrambling to the side, but my back hit the towel rack, making it clang loudly. My phone was still lying on the floor, its screen faintly glowing. I reached for it with trembling hands, my fingers fumbling like I'd forgotten how to use them. The light from the screen barely illuminated the room, but it was enough to see him. He was standing in the doorway, leaning in so far that his shoulders touched the frame, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His face was pale, almost colorless, with features that didn't quite make sense. His eyes were too large, too dark, like pools of ink that had swallowed any trace of humanity. His mouth was twisted into a grin so wide it looked like it hurt, exposing teeth that were too sharp, too perfect, too wrong. And then there was the suit. It was clean, sharp, like something out of an old black and white movie, but it didn't fit him right. The sleeves were too short, the shoulders too narrow, like it had been tailored for someone else, and he just borrowed it. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, staring at me. And then, as if he could sense my thoughts, he whispered, "You don't like my suit?" I almost dropped the phone again. My breath hitched in my throat, my chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked gasps. He stepped forward, his movements jerky, like a marionette being controlled by someone who didn't quite know what they were doing. The closer he got, the colder the air became. It wasn't just the kind of cold that makes you shiver. It was deeper than that, like it was sinking into my bones and freezing me from the inside out. "Liam," he said, dragging my name out like he was savoring it. "You've been chosen for something very special." "What the hell do you want?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely more than a whisper. His grin widened. How that was even possible, I don't know. And he crouched down so we were at eye level. His knees cracked loudly, like dry twigs snapping underfoot. "Midnight is a doorway," he said. "You opened it." "I didn't mean to," I blurted, clutching my phone like it was a talisman that could somehow protect me. "I didn't know." "Oh, Liam." He chuckled, the sound low and guttural, like it was coming from deep inside his chest. "You don't have to know. You just have to watch." Before I could respond, he reached out with one impossibly long finger and tapped the screen of my phone. The video feed from the countdown came back to life, playing on its own, but it wasn't showing the clock anymore. It was showing me. The feed was from inside the bathroom, from an angle that didn't make sense. It wasn't coming from my phone or the laptop. This was from somewhere else, somewhere higher, like a bird's eye view of my tiny cramped space. I watched as the figure in the video, me, pressed himself against the wall, shaking, clutching his phone like it was a lifeline. And then I watched as the other me on the screen slowly turned his head, his eyes wide with terror, turned his head to look directly at the man in the suit. My brain couldn't process it. I was staring at myself in real time, but I wasn't moving. It was like the me in the video had a mind of his own, separate from the real me. What is this?" I stammered, my voice barely audible. "This is what happens when you look too deep," the man in the suit said. His voice was calm, almost soothing, but his grin never wavered. "When you ask the questions you're not meant to ask." The feed on the phone shifted again, but this time it wasn't showing me. It was showing someone else. A woman sitting in her car. She was parked outside a Starbucks, sipping from a cup and scrolling on her phone. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken, like she hadn't slept in days. I recognized her instantly. She was the woman from the countdown video, the one who'd looked directly at the camera. The feed zoomed in on her slowly, and as it did, her expression changed. She stopped scrolling, her hands trembling as she stared at something off-screen, and then she started screaming. The sound cut through the silence of the bathroom, sharp and guttural, and I flinched so hard I almost dropped the phone. The man in the suit laughed softly, the sound sending chills down my spine. "Do you know what she saw?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. I shook my head, my mouth dry, my throat tight. "She saw her end," he said simply. "And so will you." The feed changed again. This time, it was a man walking down a dark alley. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. The camera followed him from a distance, closing in slowly, and then he froze. The screen glitched, just for a moment, and when the image stabilized, the man was gone. The alley was empty. Where did he go?" I asked, my voice cracking. The man in the suit leaned closer, his grin widening so much that it looked like it might split his face in two. "He's with us now," he said, "and soon you will be too." I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted for the door, shoving past him with more strength than I thought I had. He didn't try to stop me, just stood there, watching, his head tilted like he was amused. The apartment was dark, silent, and colder than it had been before. I didn't look back. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and bolted out the door. taking the stairs 2 at a time. But when I reached the lobby, the front door wouldn't open. I yanked at it, pounded on it, screamed for help, but it wouldn't budge. The windows wouldn't break either. It was like the entire building had sealed itself shut. And then my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The text was short and simple. You can't run, Liam. Midnight is forever. And then the lights went out. The darkness in the lobby wasn't just an absence of light. It felt alive, heavy, oppressive, like it was swallowing everything around me. My breathing sounded deafening in my ears as I clutched my phone, its faint glow the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. And then I heard it. Footsteps. They weren't hurried or frantic. They were calm, measured, coming from the staircase I just sprinted down. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound of leather soles on the old tile floor echoed through the lobby, steady as a metronome. I knew who it was before I even turned around. I didn't need to see him to feel his presence. It was like the air itself was vibrating with the weight of him. Liam, his voice came, smooth and slow, like he had all the time in the world. Running won't help. Midnight doesn't care how fast you are. I whipped around, aiming my phone screen toward the staircase. The faint light barely pierced the darkness, but I could make out his silhouette. The man in the suit. He was standing on the last step, one hand resting casually on the banister, his head tilted at that unnatural angle. His grin hadn't faded. It never did. But his eyes seemed darker now, deeper, like 2 black holes pulling everything in. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking. I wasn't even sure what I was threatening him with. My phone, my keys, my sheer panic. He ignored me and took another step forward. Click, clack. "You've already crossed the threshold," he said, his voice echoing strangely, like it was coming from every corner of the room at once. "You've seen the other side. You've watched what you weren't meant to see." I backed away until my shoulders hit the glass door. It was cold, impossibly cold, like I was leaning against a wall of ice. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for me to see the details of his face. His skin wasn't just pale, it was almost translucent, like parchment stretched too thin. Veins snaked under the surface, dark and pulsing, as if something other than blood was flowing through them. "I want nothing," he said simply. "Midnight, however, demands a sacrifice." I froze. Sacrifice?" His grin widened, the corners of his mouth stretching unnaturally. "Time is a delicate thing, Liam. Midnight is a crack, a flaw in the fabric. And when you open the door, you let it in." "I didn't open anything," I shouted, panic rising in my chest. "Oh, but you did," he said, his tone almost gentle, like he was explaining something to a child. "You clicked the link. You watched the countdown. You invited it in." My mind was racing, trying to piece together some kind of logic, some kind of explanation. But there was no logic here, no reason, no sense. Just this thing standing in front of me, telling me I doomed myself by doing nothing more than clicking on a video. What happens if I don't do what it wants? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. His grin faded for the first time. His expression didn't change completely, but there was something in his eyes now, something colder, darker. "Midnight is patient," he said. "It will take what it's owed, one way or another." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced down, and my stomach twisted into knots. It was another text. No number, just the same blank sender as before. The message read, Choose. Attached was another photo. This time, it wasn't me. It was a young couple in their apartment, laughing and clinking champagne glasses. Their living room was cozy, warmly lit, with a TV in the background showing the Times Square ball drop. I didn't recognize them, but something about the photo felt wrong. The way the camera was angled, the way it seemed to focus on the woman's face. And then I saw it. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the shadows, was him. The man in the suit. I looked up, panic flooding my veins. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, waving the phone at him. "A gift," he said, tilting his head. "A choice. Midnight isn't cruel, Liam. It offers you an alternative." "What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, and I pressed myself harder against the glass, as if I could somehow force my way through it. "The couple," he said, his voice low and measured. "Their lives for yours. You've seen them. They've seen you. The connection is made." I shook my head, my chest tightening. No way. I'm not killing anyone." He chuckled softly, the sound sending chills down my spine. "You misunderstand. Midnight doesn't ask you to act. It simply asks you to choose. You can stay here, in the safety of your home, and let the clock reset. Midnight will take them instead." I stared at him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "And if I don't choose?" His grin returned, sharper than ever. "Then you'll see what happens when midnight runs out of patience." I looked back at the phone, my hands trembling. The couple in the photo looked so ordinary, so normal. They had no idea they were being watched, no idea their lives were hanging by a thread. "I can't," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "You must," he said. "Midnight waits for no one." And then the lights flickered back on. The lobby was empty. He was gone. But my phone buzzed again, and another text appeared. "The clock is ticking, Liam. Choose wisely." The photo was different this time. It wasn't the couple. It was someone else. It was my sister. She was sitting on the couch in her living room, laughing as she scrolled through her phone. The camera angle was the same, high, distant, watching her like prey. I dropped the phone, my knees giving out, as I collapsed to the floor. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the man's words echoed in my head. Midnight will take what it's owed, one way or another. I looked at the phone again, my vision blurred with tears. The timer was back, ticking down. 11:59:30, 30 seconds to midnight. And I still hadn't made my choice. The timer on my phone ticked down with brutal precision. 11:59:29, 11:59:28. Each second felt like a hammer pounding against my skull, reverberating through my chest. My hands were slick with sweat, shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. On the screen, my sister smiled obliviously at something on her phone. The living room around her was dimly lit, the soft glow of a lamp casting warm shadows on the walls. It was so normal, so innocent, and yet there was something there. I squinted at the corner of the photo, my breath catching in my throat. At first, it was hard to see, just a faint outline against the shadows of her living room. But as I stared, it became clearer. The grin, the suit, the eyes that were black holes pulling everything in. He was already there. "Leave her alone," I screamed, my voice breaking as I hurled the phone across the room. It hit the glass door and shattered, fragments scattering across the tile floor. But the timer didn't stop. It didn't care. 11:59:15. "You know what to do, Liam," came his voice, calm, assured. like he had all the time in the world. I spun around, and there he was, standing in the center of the lobby, as if he'd always been there. His hands were clasped neatly in front of him, his grin impossibly wide. "I'm not choosing," I shouted, my fists clenched so tightly my nails bit into my palms. "You hear me? I'm not playing your sick game." His head tilted, his neck bending so far it looked like it might snap. "Oh, Liam," he said softly, almost pitying. "You don't understand. Midnight isn't a game. Midnight is balance. Midnight is inevitable." I backed away, my foot crunching on broken glass. "Why me? Why not someone else?" His smile faltered for just a moment, replaced by something colder. "Because you're the one who opened the door." My mind raced, clawing for some kind of logic, some way out, but the timer was relentless. 11:59 and 5 seconds. 11:59 and 4 seconds. I thought of my sister, her laugh, her stupid inside jokes, the way she always picked up my calls no matter how late it was. She didn't deserve this. I thought of the couple in the first photo, strangers to me, but people with lives, with families, with plans for the future. And then I thought of myself, sitting here, useless, paralyzed, caught in the web of something I didn't understand. "You're running out of time," the man in the suit said, his voice low and steady. "Midnight is hungry." The air grew colder, the shadows around him stretching and twisting like they were alive. The room felt smaller, darker, like the walls were closing in. "Go to hell," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He laughed, a sound that wasn't human, that didn't belong in this world. "Liam," he said, taking a step closer, "hell is already here." The timer hit 11:59:59, and then it stopped. For one agonizing moment, everything was silent. The world seemed to hold its breath, the air so thick it felt like it was crushing me. And then the lights went out. The darkness was absolute. I couldn't see my hands in front of my face, couldn't hear anything but my own panicked breathing. But I could feel him. He was close. So close, I could feel the cold radiating off him like a living thing. "Your time is up," he whispered, his voice slicing through the silence. Suddenly, the timer was back, glowing faintly in the darkness, but it wasn't counting anymore. It was stuck on 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. The screen flickered, and the video feed returned. I saw my sister again, but she wasn't sitting on the couch anymore. She was standing in the middle of her living room, staring at the camera with wide, unblinking eyes. Her expression was blank, almost as if she wasn't really there. And then I saw it. The man in the suit stepped into frame, his movements slow and deliberate. He stood behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. His grin was the same as always, but his eyes were fixed on the camera, fixed on me. "She's mine now, Liam," he said, his voice echoing through the darkness around me. "You've made your choice." "No!" I screamed, lunging forward as if I could somehow reach through the screen and pull her back. But there was nothing to grab, nothing to fight. The screen flickered again, and this time it showed the couple from before. They were still sitting on the couch, but their faces were wrong. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths stretched into unnatural smiles. "They're mine too," the man said. I dropped to my knees, tears streaming down my face. "Please," I begged, "take me instead. Just take me." He crouched down in front of me, his grin inches from my face. His breath was ice cold against my skin. "Liam," he said softly, "midnight doesn't bargain. Midnight simply is." And then everything went black. I woke up in my apartment, the morning light streaming through the windows. My phone was on the coffee table, unbroken, the screen showing a normal home screen. No countdowns, no photos, no videos. For a brief moment, I thought it was all a nightmare. Just some horrible, vivid dream brought on by too much Reddit and too little sleep. But then I turned on the TV. The news anchor was somber, her voice shaking slightly as she delivered the story. A young couple had been found dead in their apartment that morning, their faces frozen in unnatural smiles. The screen cut to footage of their building, and my stomach dropped. It was the same building from the countdown video. And in a separate incident, the anchor continued, a woman was found unresponsive in her home. Authorities say there were no signs of a struggle, but her expression was unusual. They showed her picture. It was my sister. My vision blurred, and I dropped the remote, my hand shaking uncontrollably. On the screen, the news anchor moved on to another story, her tone detached and professional, but I didn't hear her. My gaze had fallen to the corner of the room, to the shadow that didn't belong. He was there, watching, waiting, and his grin was as wide as ever. Midnight is forever. I found a dark web stream claiming to expose Elon Musk's secret projects. One of the blueprints looked like my house. Alright, let me just start by saying I'm not one of those conspiracy nuts. I don't spend my time in Reddit threads about aliens or secret societies or whatever. But I do have one really bad habit. I love internet rabbit holes. You know, clicking on weird YouTube recommendations at 2 a.m., watching grainy security cam footage of unexplained events, and trying to figure out if those creepy Reddit posts are real or fake. It's a guilty pleasure. And yeah, maybe I pushed my luck one too many times. It all started 2 weeks ago. I was working a late night shift at my job. I manage inventory at a local Starbucks. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. I got home around 1:30 a.m., too wired to sleep. So I did what any millennial with no self-control would do. I hopped online. TikTok wasn't hitting the same that night, and I'd already scrolled through Instagram for way too long, so I switched over to Reddit. I started on r/NOSLEEP because who doesn't love a good scare before bed? Then one post caught my attention. It wasn't even creepy at first. It was this random thread about how to access the safe side of the dark web. Most people in the comments were joking, but someone had left this weirdly detailed reply, like an instruction manual. They mentioned sites I'd never heard of before, stuff about using a VPN, and some specific browser to access them. The post got taken down a few minutes later, but not before I copied the instructions into a Word document. Honestly, I didn't even know why I did it. It was one of those spur-of-the-moment things. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not in an obsessive way, just curiosity. Like, was the dark web as sketchy as people made it out to be? I mean, I wasn't planning to buy black market kidneys or anything, but I wondered if it was really all just scammers and hackers. So, after work, I decided to try it out. Setting it up was surprisingly easy. I downloaded the special browser, clicked through the VPN setup, thanks YouTube tutorials, and within 20 minutes, I was in. Honestly, I was kind of underwhelmed at first. Most of the websites were boring forums or shady-looking marketplaces selling knockoff sneakers or fake passports. But then I came across a link that had no title, just a series of random letters and numbers. Beneath it was a description that said, "Livestream, the truth Elon Musk doesn't want you to know." Now, I'm not gonna lie, I rolled my eyes. It sounded like one of those clickbait YouTube videos where someone goes, "What they don't want you to know about Tesla will shock you." But curiosity got the better of me, so I clicked. I mean, worst case, it was just some guy ranting about how SpaceX is fake or something, right? The stream opened up instantly. The quality wasn't great, grainy, like a bad Zoom call, but there was something about it that felt off. The screen was split in two. On the left, there was a static image of Elon Musk, looking like he was in some kind of press conference. On the right was a black screen with a single glowing cursor. No chat, no usernames, nothing. After about a minute, a robotic voice came through the speakers. It was one of those AI voices, flat and emotionless, like Siri's evil twin. It said, "Tonight, we expose secrets too dangerous for the public to know. Secrets that could change the world. You've been warned." And then the black screen lit up. At first, it showed a series of blueprints. They were highly detailed, diagrams of weird machines with labels like oxygen recycling unit and cryostasis chamber. It looked like some kind of science fiction movie, like concepts for a Mars colony or something. But then the blueprints started getting strange. One of them showed what looked like a humanoid robot, except its torso was hollow, like it was designed to carry something inside it. Another was a design for a massive underground facility, complete with tunnels and rooms labeled specimen storage. I couldn't look away. It was the kind of stuff that felt like you weren't supposed to see it, you know? The robotic voice kept narrating, saying things like, "Prototype 2, A, banned by international law, developed 2022, location, unknown." And then, the final blueprint came up. At first it looked normal, just the floor plan for a house. But then I realized something that made my stomach drop. The layout was identical to mine. I'm talking exactly the same. Same kitchen, same living room, same weird little closet under the stairs that I always thought was too small to be useful. I froze. My first thought was, this has to be a coincidence. Maybe this was a standard design for houses in my area or something. But then the robotic voice said something that made my blood run cold. Subject 6, A, primary test site for Project Observer. Location, latitude, redacted. Longitude, redacted. My brain was racing. I didn't know my exact latitude and longitude off the top of my head, but something about the way the voice said it made me feel like it was talking about me. My house. I swear, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, like a drum. And then the screen went black. Just like that, the stream ended. No error message. No, thanks for watching. Nothing. I refreshed the page, but it was gone. Like it had never existed. I closed the browser and sat there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at my screen. I didn't know what to do. Call the cops? And tell them what? That I found a creepy live stream on the dark web. They'd probably laugh me out of the station. But as I sat there, my phone buzzed. I jumped like I'd been electrocuted. It was a text from an unknown number. All it said was, "We're watching." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind against the windows, it all felt amplified, like the walls themselves were alive and breathing. I sat in my living room, staring at the text on my phone. "We're watching." It felt like a threat, but it was so vague it could have meant anything. And that's the worst part, isn't it? When you don't know what's coming, when you don't even know if something's coming, your brain just fills in the blanks with the most terrifying possibilities. I kept trying to convince myself it was some kind of elaborate prank, Maybe from a hacker who'd found my IP address. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. That blueprint, that floor plan, there was no way it was random. Around 4 a.m., when the sky was starting to lighten, I finally forced myself to check my house. I know it sounds paranoid, but I felt like I had to do it. I grabbed a flashlight, even though all the lights were on, and started walking room to room. The first thing I noticed was how silent it was. My house is never completely quiet. The fridge hums, the AC kicks in, the neighbor's dog barks at God knows what. But that night, it was dead still, like the whole world was holding its breath. Even my cat, Luna, was acting weird. She wasn't lounging on her usual spot on the couch. Instead, she was crouched under the dining table, her tail puffed up and her eyes locked on the staircase. She didn't even look at me when I called her name, just stared. I don't know if it was her or my own nerves, but I started to feel like I wasn't alone in the house. I checked the windows. They were all locked. I checked the doors, even the one leading to the garage, locked. But when I got to the closet under the stairs, I hesitated. That closet had always creeped me out. It's tiny, barely big enough to store a broom and a vacuum cleaner, but something about it just felt wrong. I don't know how to explain it. It's like the air around it was heavier, like it didn't belong in the house. Taking a deep breath, I gripped the handle and yanked it open. It was empty, completely empty. No broom, no vacuum, nothing. Which didn't make any sense, because I knew I'd shoved a bunch of junk in there months ago. Old shoes, a broken toaster, some boxes of Christmas decorations I was too lazy to put in the attic. But now, it was like someone had cleaned it out. I stepped inside, shining the flashlight around. The walls were plain white, no markings or anything unusual. But then, when I aimed the light at the floor, I saw it. A small, round hole, about the size of a quarter, drilled into the corner near the baseboard. It looked new, the edges too clean to have been there for long. That's when I realized it wasn't just a hole, it was a camera. My stomach dropped. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I inspected it closer. The lens was so tiny I almost missed it, but there it was, staring back at me like a cold, unblinking eye. Someone had been watching me from inside my house. I don't even remember standing up. 1 second, I was crouched by the camera, and the next, I was running through the house, tearing open every cabinet, every drawer, looking for more of them. I found 3 more, one in the living room, hidden in the vent above the TV, one in the bathroom, tucked behind the mirror, and one in my bedroom, embedded in the corner of the ceiling. They were everywhere. The thought that someone had been spying on me, watching me sleep, watching me shower, watching me sit here, thinking I was alone, made me feel sick. My skin crawled, like I could feel their eyes on me even now. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to call the cops, but something stopped me. What was I going to say? Hi, I found some hidden cameras in my house, and I think it might have something to do with a dark web live stream about Elon Musk. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, they wouldn't believe me at all. And what if whoever was watching was connected to the police? It sounds paranoid, I know, but after what I'd seen on that stream, nothing felt impossible anymore. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I packed a bag, just the essentials, clothes, my laptop, my phone charger, a few snacks, and I left. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I just got in my car and started driving. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to get away, to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever was happening in that house. I drove for hours, the sun rising in my rearview mirror. At some point, I ended up in a Walmart parking lot, parked between a beat-up minivan and an old pickup truck. I sat there, engine off, staring at the dashboard and trying to make sense of everything. That's when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a notification from my email. The subject line read, "Blueprint update." My heart sank as I opened it. The email had no body, just an attachment. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. It was another blueprint, but this one wasn't of my house. It was of the Walmart I was sitting in. I swear, I could feel the blood drain from my face. The layout was identical, down to the row of parked cars outside. But this blueprint had something my houses didn't. Red dots scattered throughout the map, like tracking beacons. One of them was right where I was sitting. Before I could react, a second email came through. This one had a video attachment. With shaking hands, I opened it. The footage was grainy, but it was clear enough to recognize what I was looking at. My car, sitting in the Walmart parking lot. From the angle, it was obvious the video was being filmed from above, like from a drone. I didn't even have time to process it before something hit my windshield. It was a bird. At least I think it was a bird. Its wings were mangled, its body twisted in a way that didn't look natural, and its eyes, they weren't eyes. They were cameras, little glass lenses staring at me through the shattered remains of its skull. I screamed and threw the car into reverse, peeling out of the parking lot so fast I almost hit the minivan behind me. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel steady, but I didn't care. I just kept driving, the bird, or whatever it was, lying broken on the asphalt behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but one thing was clear. Whoever was behind this didn't just know where I lived. They knew where I was. They knew where I was going, and somehow they were always one step ahead. I drove until the gas light came on. By that point, I was somewhere off a rural highway, surrounded by nothing but fields and the occasional gas station or diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1950s. I didn't care. I wasn't trying to find a destination. I was just trying to stay ahead of whatever the hell was following me. The sun was setting, bathing everything in this eerie orange glow that made the empty fields look endless. The isolation was almost comforting, but it didn't last long. The whole drive, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone tailing me, but there was nothing. No cars, no people, just the empty road and my own panicked breathing. I finally pulled into a gas station that looked abandoned at first glance. The neon open sign flickered weakly in the window, and the parking lot was completely empty except for a single white van parked near the pumps. It was one of those generic vans with no windows, the kind that makes you immediately think of serial killers or undercover surveillance. But I was too desperate to care. My car was practically running on fumes, and I needed gas. I parked on the farthest pump from the van, got out, and started fueling up. The air felt thick, like a storm was coming, even though the sky was perfectly clear. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced at the van, but the windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. I turned my back to it, trying to focus on the gas pump, but that only made it worse. I could feel someone's eyes on me, boring into the back of my skull. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the nozzle. When the tank was full, I shoved the nozzle back into the pump and jumped back into my car, slamming the door shut. But before I could start the engine, my phone buzzed. Another email. No subject line this time, just a blank message with an attachment. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to throw my phone out the window and floor it. But curiosity, or stupidity, got the better of me. I tapped the attachment. It was a photo of me. Not a selfie, not an old photo from my social media. It was me right now, sitting in my car at this exact gas station. The angle was high, like it had been taken from above, maybe from the gas station security camera. But that wasn't the part that made my stomach drop. In the corner of the photo, barely visible but unmistakable, was a figure standing behind the van. They were dressed in all black, their face obscured by a hoodie, but their posture was stiff, almost unnatural, like they were just standing there, waiting. I looked up, my eyes darting to the van. The figure was gone. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I scanned the parking lot, the fields, the gas station's shadowy interior, but there was no sign of them, just me, the van, and the oppressive silence. That's when I noticed the van's back doors were slightly ajar. Nope. 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 Every horror movie I'd ever watched was screaming in my head to get out of there. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, but before I could put it in drive, the van's doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. I almost jumped out of my skin, and then it started moving. The van pulled out of its spot slowly, almost casually, like whoever was inside wanted me to know they weren't in a rush. It rolled past my car, so close I could see my own reflection in its glossy white paint. As it passed, I caught a glimpse of the driver's window. The driver wasn't wearing a hoodie. They weren't wearing anything, really. Their face was completely smooth. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank, pale oval where a face should have been. It was like looking at a mannequin, except it moved. Its head turned toward me as the van rolled by, as if it was staring at me with invisible eyes. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen. It felt like hours, but it was probably only seconds. The van turned onto the highway and disappeared into the distance, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. I needed help. I needed answers. But who the hell was I supposed to turn to? The police? They'd think I was crazy. My friends? Most of them lived states away. And even if I called them, what could they do? This wasn't just some random stalker. This was something bigger, something inhuman. I opened my laptop, hoping I could find some trace of that live stream, something that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. But when I connected to the Wi-Fi hotspot on my phone, my browser wouldn't load. Instead, the screen went black, and a single line of text appeared in the center. You shouldn't have looked. My laptop shut itself off. No error screen, no battery warning, nothing, just dead. I slammed it shut and threw it into the passenger seat, breathing heavily. That's when I noticed the gas station attendant standing outside the building, staring at me. He was an older man, with gray hair and a cigarette hanging from his lips. He looked normal enough, until he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was too wide, too forced, like he was wearing someone else's face. His teeth were perfectly straight and blindingly white, like something out of an advertisement for dental implants. But his eyes were dead, flat, like a doll's. Without thinking, I threw the car into drive and peeled out of the gas station, leaving the man and the van behind. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. I don't even remember getting back on the highway. It was all a blur of headlights and dark, empty roads. But then I started seeing the faces. It started with the other drivers. Every time I passed a car, I'd glance at the driver's seat, and their face would be wrong. Sometimes they were blank, like the van driver. Other times they were distorted, too big, too small, their features stretched and twisted like a bad Photoshop job. But every single one of them would turn to look at me as I passed, their necks snapping unnaturally to follow my car. I sped up, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The faster I drove, the more distorted the faces became. It was like the whole world was unraveling around me, warping into something I didn't understand. And then I saw her. She was standing on the side of the road, barefoot and wearing a tattered white dress that looked soaked with something dark. Her hair hung over her face, matted and stringy, but I could still make out her smile. That same too wide, too perfect smile as the gas station attendant. As I sped past her, she turned to look at me, her head twisting a full 180 degrees like it was on a swivel. I don't remember screaming, but I must have, because my throat was raw by the time I pulled over onto the shoulder. I sat there, trembling, as the road stretched on into the darkness. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know who or what is doing this. But one thing is clear. I can't outrun it. No matter where I go, they'll find me. And the worst part? I think they've always been watching. I don't know how long I sat there on the side of that empty highway, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. My mind was racing, replaying every bizarre, horrifying thing I'd seen. The faces, the gas station, the cameras in my house. But the thought that kept gnawing at me, the one I couldn't shake, was the blueprint, the one of my house. And now, wherever I went, they seemed to know. Like they had another blueprint, tracking my every move. That's when it hit me. The basement. I hadn't thought about it in years. My house came with one of those weird, half-finished basements, the kind with exposed pipes, concrete floors, and a faint smell of damp earth. I'd barely ever used it, mostly because it creeped me out. It always felt colder than it should, like there was something alive down there, something waiting. I'd shoved a few old boxes down there when I first moved in and never gone back. But now, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The blueprint on the live stream didn't just show the layout of my house. It had something else. A section under the house that wasn't supposed to be there. A hidden room, or chamber, or something, right below the basement. I thought it was just some weird error at the time, but now I wasn't so sure. I decided to go back. Yeah, I know how stupid that sounds. Believe me, every fiber of my being was screaming at me not to, but I didn't have a choice. I had to know what was down there. The drive back felt surreal, like I was moving in slow motion. The highway was empty, the radio refused to turn on, and my phone kept glitching out every time I tried to check Google Maps. At one point, I passed a McDonald's sign glowing in the distance, but the letters were scrambled, flickering erratically. It wasn't until I pulled into my neighborhood that I realized how wrong everything was. The streetlights were out. Every house was dark, their windows staring back at me like empty sockets. My house was at the end of the cul-de-sac, and as I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The front door was wide open. I parked a few houses down and sat there for a minute, watching, waiting for some sign of movement. But the house was completely still, eerily quiet. Too quiet. Even the usual ambient sounds, the chirp of crickets, the rustling of leaves, were gone. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched beneath my feet as I approached the house, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. The open door yawned in front of me, and as I stepped inside, I realized the air felt wrong. Heavy, thick, like walking through water. The house looked exactly as I'd left it, but it didn't feel the same. The lights wouldn't turn on when I flipped the switch, and my footsteps echoed unnaturally loud on the hardwood floors. Luna, my cat, was nowhere to be seen. That scared me more than anything. She never left the house, ever. I made my way to the basement door, which was at the far end of the kitchen. The door was slightly ajar, revealing nothing but blackness below. My flashlight flickered as I aimed it down the stairs, the beam barely penetrating the thick darkness. Taking a deep breath, I descended. The basement was colder than I remembered. My breath came out in visible puffs, and the air smelled damp and metallic, like rust and mold. I swept the flashlight around, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but it was just as I'd left it. Bare walls, exposed pipes, a few old boxes piled in the corner, and then I saw it. In the far corner of the room, near the foundation wall, there was something new. A metal hatch, bolted to the floor. It was square, about 3 feet on each side, with a heavy padlock hanging from a rusted loop. The padlock was old, but the hatch itself looked new, like it had been installed recently. My hands were shaking as I knelt down to inspect it. The blueprint from the live stream flashed in my mind. The hidden room. This was it. I didn't know how or why it was here, but I knew it wasn't supposed to be. I tried to pull the hatch open, but the padlock held tight. Desperation took over, and I grabbed a nearby wrench from my toolbox, using it to smash the lock repeatedly. Each hit echoed through the basement like a gunshot, but I didn't care. I had to get it open. After what felt like an eternity, the lock finally snapped, the rusted metal giving way with a loud crack. I dropped the wrench and hesitated, my hand hovering over the hatch. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to stop, to turn around, to run, but I couldn't. I had to know. I pulled the hatch open. The smell hit me first, acrid, metallic, and overpowering, like a mix of blood and burnt plastic. The flashlight beam revealed a set of narrow spiral stairs leading down into the darkness. The walls were lined with some kind of shiny black material that reflected the light in distorted patterns, making it impossible to tell how deep it went. I took the first step. The stairs creaked under my weight, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. My breathing was shallow, each step taking me deeper into the unknown. The deeper I went, the darker it got, until the flashlight barely illuminated the steps in front of me. Finally, I reached the bottom. The room was small, no bigger than a walk-in closet, but what I saw there will haunt me for the rest of my life. The walls were covered in photos, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all pinned in neat, grid-like rows. They were all of me at work, me at Starbucks, me sleeping in my bed, me sitting on my couch watching TV, me standing at the gas station earlier that night. In the center of the room was a single chair, bolted to the floor. Straps hung loosely from the armrests and legs, stained with something dark and crusty. Beneath the chair, the concrete floor was covered in deep scratch marks, like someone or something had been trying to claw their way free. On the far wall was a table, cluttered with bizarre equipment, wires, monitors, what looked like surgical tools. and in the center of the table was a jar filled with what looked like human teeth. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, the room was plunged into darkness. When the beam returned, the photos on the wall had changed. They weren't of me anymore. They were of my parents, my friends, my co-workers, everyone I'd ever known. And then I heard it. A slow, deliberate creak from the stairs behind me. The sound of the creak from the stairs behind me felt like a knife dragging across my spine. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hand. I didn't want to turn around. Every survival instinct I had screamed that if I looked, it would already be too late. But what choice did I have? I couldn't just stand there with my back to whatever had followed me into the depths of this nightmare. Slowly, I turned. The stairs were empty, or at least they looked empty. The flashlight beam barely reached the spiral staircase, casting warped shadows that seemed to shift and stretch like living things. I strained my ears, listening for any movement, any breathing, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Then something changed. The air in the room got colder, impossibly cold, like I'd stepped into a walk-in freezer. My breath came out in thick white clouds, and the flashlight started to flicker again. I felt it before I saw it. This oppressive, suffocating presence, like the darkness itself, was alive and pressing in around me. And then I heard it. A voice. Low, guttural, and layered, like multiple people whispering in unison. You shouldn't be here. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating through the room like a chilling echo. My knees buckled, and I nearly dropped the flashlight. I swung the beam wildly, illuminating the walls, the photos, the twisted chair, but nothing was there. And then I noticed the photos were changing again. One by one, the images of my parents, my friends, and my co-workers were being replaced by new ones. Images of me in this very room. My hand on the hatch, my foot on the stairs, my face frozen in terror as I stared at the photos. It was like someone or something was watching me in real time, documenting every second. The whispers started again, growing louder this time, overlapping until they became an unbearable cacophony. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't just outside of me. They were inside, crawling through my skull like insects. Run. Hide. It's too late. And then, just as suddenly as they'd started, they stopped. The silence was deafening, almost worse than the noise. I lowered my hands, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing at the bottom of the stairs. It wasn't human. It had a humanoid shape, sure. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But its proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending at unnatural angles. Its skin, or what passed for skin, was a sickly, mottled gray, like it had been rotting for years. And its face, or lack of a face, it was smooth, featureless, just like the driver of the van. But the worst part was the way it moved. It didn't walk, it didn't shuffle or lurch like something out of a zombie movie. It glided, smooth and silent, its head tilted unnaturally to the side, as if it were studying me. My flashlight beam landed on it, but instead of illuminating it, the light seemed to dim, like the creature was absorbing it. I stumbled back, hitting the table with the jar of teeth. The glass toppled, spilling its contents across the floor with a sickening clatter. The thing didn't react. It just stood there, motionless, its head still tilted as if it was waiting for me to make a move. And then, without warning, it lunged. It didn't make a sound, but its speed was inhuman, crossing the small room in a blink. I barely managed to throw myself to the side, the creature slamming into the chair and sending it skidding across the floor. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the first thing I could find, a rusted pipe from the corner, and swung it with all my strength. The pipe connected with a sickening crunch, but the thing didn't even flinch. Instead, it turned its faceless head toward me, its elongated fingers twitching like it was just warming up. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time. Behind me, I could hear it following, its movements unnervingly silent, except for the occasional scrape of its claw-like fingers against the walls. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging the stairwell into darkness. But I didn't need light to know it was right behind me. I could feel it, that suffocating presence closing in, its icy breath brushing against the back of my neck. I reached the top of the stairs and slammed the hatch shut, throwing my weight on it as I scrambled to lock it. But the lock was gone, shattered from when I'd broken it earlier. The hatch started to tremble beneath me, the creature pounding against it from below. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a toolbox, and slammed it onto the hatch, wedging it against the door. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. And then everything went quiet. No pounding, no movement, just silence. I didn't trust it. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the hatch, waiting for it to burst open. But it didn't. The house was deathly still, the kind of quiet that made your ears ring. And then my phone buzzed. I nearly screamed. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pull it from my pocket. It was another email, this time with a subject line. Your role is complete. I didn't want to open it. I knew nothing good could come from it, but I couldn't stop myself. The message was short, just 2 words. Look outside. My heart stopped. I turned, slowly, dreading what I might see. Through the living room window, I saw them. Dozens of them. Figures identical to the one in the basement, standing perfectly still in my yard. Their featureless faces were all turned toward the house, toward me. They didn't move, didn't make a sound. They just stood there, like an audience waiting for the show to begin. And then, in unison, they all tilted their heads. I stumbled back, tripping over the coffee table and landing hard on the floor. When I looked up, they were gone. Just gone. The yard was empty, as if they'd never been there at all. But the silence didn't last. From somewhere deep below me, I heard it. A slow, deliberate knock. Once, twice, 3 times. It was coming from the hatch. And then the whispers started again. You shouldn't have looked.